Welcome everyone to the Inspire Life podcast. My name is Michael. I am your producer, also your co-host. And today I'm going to be interviewing Rachel Schroman, with Schroman Law. And if you've listened to the show and tuned in before, you know that Dr. Mel and I know there's power in stories. And when we can share and hear other people's stories, a lot of times there's room for growth and personal development. And just empathy and being human, right? Understanding that human-to-human connection. So when it comes to story, Rachel has a powerful story for us about being a woman in recovery and how that has impacted you and the work you do in your career. So if you can tell us about, take us back to the start and when you realized that going through a path of recovery was gonna be a necessary thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, I guess to go way back to the start, I grew up in a smaller town in Iowa, and I had my first drink when I was 14. And quite frankly, in the community I grew up in, I was kind of behind the curve. So that didn't seem abnormal at that time. I still did really well in school. I went through college with a scholarship, went through law school with a scholarship. But as, I got older, my drinking increased. And a lot of it was, at least at the time, I was identifying it as how I was dealing with stress and pressure, to the point that it really became the only way I could deal with stress and pressure. So I was going into my third year of law school, and it was summertime, and that summer I was actually working for a judge who sat over drug court. And different counties in Minnesota, Ramsey County in particular, has a really great drug court program that is part of the legal system, but really has a very strong presence of recovery. They're really supporting the individuals going through drug court, not in a way that focuses on necessarily penalizing them, but rehabilitating them, giving them the support they need to find their own path in recovery. So that summer, I was going into my third year of law school. My own personal use I was starting to struggle with that. And, one day I went into work for this judge and I sat in drug court, and they were acknowledging sobriety milestones. And I watched these defendants in drug court get up and say, I have 30 days sober, I have 90 days sober, I have a week sober, and watch this judge with complete honesty and being totally genuine applaud and say, that is amazing, that is hard to do, here's a medallion to commemorate your sobriety. And it was really sitting in that courtroom that day that, first of all, I felt a little bit like a wolf in sheep's clothing. I'm sitting there in a suit, but I was really identifying with the feelings the participants of drug court were sharing, the struggles they were sharing just in terms of sobriety and substance use. And I was seeing something that I wanted, which was an eye-opener for me to be sitting in drug court and saying, I want this in my life. And I think it was also a really big deal for me to see, at that point, a judge, someone that I really respected and admired and looked up to, acknowledging that this was a disease and it was a big deal to get sober, and it was okay if that was a challenge and a struggle for someone. So I was at law school in St. Paul, and the law school I went to William Mitchell, they always had a lot of resources and information about addiction and mental health. It's very prevalent in the legal community, and they kind of get ahead of it by making resources very available to us in law school. And through, accessing those resources and saying, I feel I need help, I want to quit drinking, and that's going to be hard for me. That's not just a decision I felt I could make at that time to just stop. I learned that I lived in the middle of a very, very robust recovery community. So I tapped into that recovery community, and I've been fortunate and grateful that I've been a part of it ever since.
Yeah. Awesome. So, big takeaways there. I hear the kind of that epiphany moment. It sounded like eyes are open. Like this is something that I'm witnessing other people, share. And obviously, if you're in drug court, maybe it's a whole different being there as I don't know if it's a plaintiff or if you're there as someone who's versus being on the other side of it, but having that recognition, like this isn't so different than what I'm experiencing right now. And then two, like you mentioned, tapping into community, and being able to not only be a part of a community, but continue to support and recognize that, like you said, it's a disease and something that really takes a greater effort to address in a really proactive and way that's going to really help people rather than penalizing them.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And I was, the hardest part for me, and I share this in case anyone is ever finding themselves in this space, but the hardest part for me was asking for help. The first time I sat in front of, a professional, a counselor at our law school and said, I think I need to quit drinking and I don't know how, was the hardest sentence that ever came out of my mouth. But once I said it, she said, okay, let's talk about this. There's a group called Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, which I volunteer with them now, and I'm still active with them. She said, let's call them. They'll connect you with an attorney as a peer mentor. So right out of the gate, I was connected with another resource where another lawyer contacted me, another female lawyer, and she said, hey, I'm an attorney, I'm a successful attorney. I struggle with substance use disorder too. Here's my story. Here's some resources I use. What can I do to help you? And that just really started the ball rolling.
Yeah.
But saying it the first time, saying out loud for the first time, my name's Rachel and I'm an alcoholic, it's the first time was really, really rough. And then at least fortunately for me, I know it's not everyone's experience necessarily, but for me after that, things got a lot easier. Just vocalizing it, reaching out for help the first time.
Yeah, that you mentioned before we started recording, but it sounds like that was the acceptance part per se, or
yeah. There's different there's different modalities of recovery. No one is better than the other. It's whatever works for the individual. The path of recovery that works for me, one of the big pieces is practicing acceptance. Admitting I had a problem, admitting that it was something I needed help with, but then also just accepting that. And I've found, again, fortunately, that a lot of times when I've reached out for help, the response is, okay, you need help, what do we do about it? It's not a bad thing, it's not necessarily a great thing, it's just a thing. You accept it, it's part of me. My recovery and substance use disorder, the definition and experience is very, very different for everyone, and I only speak about my personal experience, which may resonate with some people. It can be entirely opposite for others. But for me, my disease of alcoholism, and being a woman in long-term recovery, that is part of me. How my body and my mind respond when I take a drink is different than how someone else's might, and that's never going to change for me. Okay, it is what it is. A common analogy in the recovery world would be, a peanut allergy. If you're allergic to peanuts, you're not going to eat peanuts because when you eat them, your face swells up and you can't breathe. The same for me with alcohol. If I take a drink of alcohol, I can't stop.
Right.
I become, I want to keep going. The idea of having one beer doesn't make sense to me.
Right.
It never will. So I just don't, abstinence is the way that is what works for me.
Yeah.
I don't drink.
I like that analogy. It's really, and another part that you touched on too is how, you have your experience and what's worked for you doesn't necessarily work for everyone else. And
right.
I think about Dr. Mel and how she approaches her chiropractic care here. It's everyone has their own healing journey, and what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for someone else. But being able to be open and, like you said, accept and then move forward and find those resources, it's just awesome to hear that you've found the way. It's found the way that's working for you. So
yeah.
Building off that too, you mentioned the Is it Lawyers Concerned About Lawyers? Was the group?
Lawyers Concerned for Lawyers, LCL.
Okay. And I know you're very involved in the community. I'm just wondering, with your story and experience with recovery, if or how that has impacted your career, the work you do, and yeah.
Yeah, so being a woman in long-term recovery, is a very important part of my life. I would say probably the most important thing to me. And then in a professional setting, I'm also an estate planning and elder law attorney. And I, initially, when I graduated law school, started my practice, was working my path of recovery, I never saw how those two would intertwine. But they have, which has been amazing. And living as a person in long-term recovery and being very open about it, it's not something I'm ashamed about. I get immense benefit from helping others in their path in recovery, and I'm able to help others when I am open and talk about it and share. Having that as such a huge piece of my life has led to a lot of referrals coming in who are impacted by substance use disorder in their own lives. So how I've seen that in my career, so I do estate planning, elder law, trust administration, and estate administration. I will get referrals, for example, of families who say they have a child who suffers from substance use disorder and is kind of in and out of recovery. Maybe they're currently using and they want to do their estate planning, but they're worried about leaving a large sum of money to that child because that a large sum of money plus an active disease can really result in disaster, if not, bluntly, death.
Yeah.
And I would get these referrals and the clients would come in and wouldn't necessarily share what was going on straight away. They would kind of say, well, our one son, Tommy, he's just taking a little while to figure things out, or, oh, he's just living at home right now. And I would be asking questions because it's important as an attorney to know all the facts to do the planning correctly. And then I would start to kind of say, maybe share a one-liner, say, oh, well, Tommy just needs to take it one day at a time. Or I'd say, well, I have other clients that, maybe they have a child with addiction. I'm a person in long-term recovery. And the second that the clients realize, oh, our attorney is part of the recovery community, our attorney gets it, they feel very, very open to share.
Yeah.
On the flip side, a lot of the estate administration referrals that I take are families who have lost a loved one to addiction. I got a call last week, gentleman whose father passed away from alcoholism. And I get those referrals, at least what I have found in my experience and what I believe is the clients feel very, very safe to talk about that family member, to talk about what's going on in the dynamic, because they know that as a woman in long-term recovery, I'm not going to judge.
Right.
And I personally walked that path. I've been impacted with, family and friends who also suffer from substance use disorder, some in recovery, some not. And that has been a huge blessing to have those clients because it allows me to practice law in a way that's a little different. I can bring my recovery experience, that level of empathy, and I just get a ton of personal fulfillment on being able to serve those clients in that capacity.
Yeah, being able to, understand where people are really coming from, being able to truly empathize, because as you mentioned, it can be a lot of different things going on that maybe people don't know or don't feel comfortable about. So being able to find, I guess maybe solace in it. It's more of back to my experience, when I work with people who want to lose weight, they know that I've lost a lot of weight. So as a person practicing something that you're passionate about and that you have firsthand experience with, people know that they can really trust you, that you're gonna, the facts, and what's gonna, best serve their interests, because that's what you're doing is offering them a service. So
right. And to share a quick story, this was one of this really highlights how this shows up and why I'm so passionate about, working with these families. I had a woman come in and meet with me. Her father passed away from the disease of alcoholism. And she came in, we were having our meeting. I was the third attorney she had met with. And she did not know at that time the reason her realtor had connected her with me was that realtor knew I was in long-term recovery. And this woman had been struggling to find an attorney that she clicked with and felt comfortable with. And she brought in these big bags of different documents, and we were going through them. And one thing in those documents was an assessment her father had taken before he went into treatment. And so this assessment asked very specific questions about his use, and he had written his answers. And as I was flipping through, I saw that, and I was, just kind of skimming a few of the answers, and, it was heartbreaking to see some of his responses and the way that he was feeling and he was struggling written out. And, it struck a personal chord because of my journey. So I teared up a little bit, and I just kind of set the folder down, and I looked at that client and I said, I am so sorry your dad died from this disease, and I'm so sorry you had to witness it. And she looked a little shocked, and she cried for a little while, and we just kind of, were quiet for a bit, and then we resumed our meeting. And she emailed me later that day, and she said, she retained me. We moved forward with the probate. She emailed me and she said, you're the first professional I've met with that I felt like I could grieve the loss of my father and not feel guilty. And I still get emotional talking about it because that, broke my heart for her, that she had to watch her dad struggle with this disease and ultimately die from it. And I feel like a lot of attitudes can be that it's the person is selfish, the person should have just quit drinking, the person should have known better. A lot of his debt was attorney's bills, ER visits, treatment centers. She had been met with a lot of judgmental reactions, and how horrible for her while she was in the grieving process. And so being able to work with her while she was grieving and show up in the attorney space, but also in a way that supported that part of her journey, that was one of the most rewarding experiences I've had as an attorney to date.
Yeah, It's really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. It's really cool, and it's just, it's a testament to you as a person, and not only your work ethic, but for how passionate you are about helping people really in need, and with things that, like we said, you really have a connection to in many ways. So I thank you for coming on and sharing your story. I love to ask this question to all of our guests. So if you want, you can take a question. Take a second to think about it. But if there's just one thing that you really want to share with our listeners, one piece of advice, one tips, just anything, whether it's about what you do or maybe anything really in your life philosophy. This is a very open-ended question.
It's very open-ended.
As open-ended as it gets, right? This is no script here.
Yeah. What I'll share is something that's been very top of mind for me lately about not being scared or ashamed to share your story and your truth and your experience. Because, as the years have gone on, and this isn't just in reference to my recovery, this is in reference to a lot of different things that happened in my life. I have found that the more I share it and talk about it, the more people reach out and say, hey, I've had that experience. Hey, I'd like to talk about that more. Hey, I appreciate you talking about that because it has inspired me to share my story more and not hold it inside. Because holding those things inside, I feel, at least for me, a lot of times it's because I'm ashamed or I don't want to talk about it and I don't want people to know, and that is a horrible weight to carry around as a person. So being open, authentic, genuine about your story, it's not only good, I'll speak, from personal experience, it hasn't only been good for me to be open about that and my healing, but the opportunities that have arose and the way I've been able to help others just with sharing my truth has been very top of mind for me in the last month as I've navigated some life things. So that is what I will share. And then lawyer hat on, don't wait to do your estate planning. I'm getting a lot of calls right now with people who are very anxiety driven with everything going on, wanting to get a will right away. When really this is something that was just as important for them to do 2 years ago as it is now. So that's my lawyer advice, is don't wait. Now is a good time to start your estate planning if you're over the age of 18.
Awesome. Well, and I thank you again for sharing your story.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
A big reason why we've created this podcast too is for people to share and find others who they can really connect with on that deeper level. So awesome. And then if you just want to share too how our listeners can get in touch with you. So
if you want to get in touch with me either for professional reasons or personal, if you have questions about recovery, questions for me, you want to talk about your journey, need support, I can be reached. My phone number is 651-571-2515, and my website is schromenlaw.com. It's SCHROMENLAW.com.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much.
Yes, thank you for having me.
Yeah, and for all of our listeners, as always, keep inspiring. Thanks again, Rachel. And thank you.
Hey there, did you find value in today's episode? We sure hope so. And make sure you like, comment, and subscribe.
Also, hop on over to Facebook and join the Inspired Living community. There, Dr. Mel and I share health and wellness tips to help you live your most inspired and thriving life.
And as always,
keep inspiring.